Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Dead Reckoning Show. Today, our episode, Moon Landing. The greatest achievement of all time, or the ultimate hoax of all time. Tell you what, it's great. It's achievement. It's definitely not a hoax. The biggest argument that I've heard for this, and yeah, I'm jumping ahead, but is that if the moon landing was hoaxed, we'd know about it by now. Like for the few years after the moon landing happened, it could be fake. You're a fake and a phony, and I wish I'd never laid eyes on you. Sure, people could keep it under wraps for a certain amount of time, but thousands of people were involved in this. Thousands of people who were probably involved with this have probably now died, and none of them, no deathbed confessions, none of them have leaked anything. No leaks ever. Other than the insane stuff like Stanley Kubrick left messages in The Shining, sort of stupid stuff. We know it happened because it's really late, and the other, it's been a really long time. The chances of it coming out as fake over time increase. And secondly, the Soviets had a really good reason to be like, hey, that's fake, it never happened. And even they were like, yeah, it happened, they beat us. That's it, that's all. Let's move on to today's video. Today's episode, we're going to look at exactly what the official version of events is, some of the alternate versions that have been put forward, and the information that supports each side. Hopefully, by the end of the video, you should be able to definitively answer the age-old question of whether or not man landed on the moon. Excuse me. One of the moments I remember as a kid that really stuck with me, I think it was like watching TV, and at the time we only had like 4 or 5 or maybe 6 channels. I was scrolling through channels, and then I stumbled upon I think it was like an hour-long documentary. Wasn't Netflix, obviously. This was way back in the day. And I just started watching it about how the moon landing was faked, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm watching this. It's like an hour-long documentary. I'm like, oh god, this evidence is irrefutable. Like, you can't see the stars, the flags waving, all this stuff. Halfway into the documentary, I'm like, I guess the moon landing was faked. Oh my god, this is blowing my mind. This is on television. Everyone should know about this. Everyone will now know this. And then the next half of the documentary, it was set up this way. The next half was then absolutely destroying all the conspiracy points that they'd made in the first half hour, leading you on. And then after that, I was like, oh my god, people are easily convinced. It wasn't really a documentary about the moon landing. It was just a documentary about how conspiracy theories worked. And it was brilliant, and it was interesting. The space race. During the 1950s, with the Cold War in full swing, the space race was a big deal. But while it was mostly presented to the public as a race for technological advancements and space exploration, in reality, the outcome had the potential to be much more serious. Now, I'm aware that nobody clicked on this video to get a history of the Cold War, but there are a few things that it's important to mention. The Soviet launch of Sputnik 1 in 1957 represented a huge military threat. Not only did it prove that the Soviets were capable of potentially launching satellites that could monitor their enemies, it also proved that they had missile capabilities to land a nuclear warhead anywhere on the globe. This launch served as a very brutal wake-up call for the United States and led to the development and launch of their own satellite, Explorer 1, in 1958. You guys see that TV show? Bit of rambling here, but what is it? For All Mankind, which explores the alternate history of the Soviets landing on the moon first. And basically, Americans land on the moon, space race is won, right? Well, and then from there, it's like, okay, we're not going to try and land anywhere on the moon. The Soviets, and For All Mankind, get to the moon first, and the Americans are like, well, we're going to build the first moon base. And it goes from there, and it's incredible. It's a brilliant TV show that is so well thought out and so clever, and it was so enjoyed watching it. Later that same year, President Eisenhower signed into existence the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, along with the National Reconnaissance Office, a top-secret program designed to gather information on the Soviets through the use of orbiting satellites. In 1959, the Soviets would move further into the lead when they launched Luna 2, the first man-made probe to hit the surface of the moon, and in 1961, a Russian cosmonaut was the first human to orbit the Earth. But in May of 1961, obviously tired of playing keep up with the Soviets, President Kennedy stated that by the end of the decade, America would put a man on the moon. By the end of 1962, the foundations of the Apollo lunar program were in place, and the race was on. Excuse me. Like Kennedy's speech, I'm not going to try and imitate Kennedy, but it's like, we do the things that are impossible or whatever. And it's like, God damn, that's a motivating, moving speech. And it did motivate people because 7 years later, from not having a man in space in America to having them on the surface of the moon, a feat that has not been repeated, is remarkable. It appears that President Kennedy took his statement very seriously. According to History.com, quote, from 1961 to 1964, NASA's budget was increased almost 500%. And the lunar landing program eventually involved some 34,000 NASA employees and 375,000 employees of industrial and university contractors. Even with all this manpower, just exactly how the process of landing humans on the moon would be accomplished was far from decided. Initially, there were three main ideas. The first, referred to as direct ascent, would involve the astronauts traveling in a singular modular spaceship out of Earth's atmosphere to the moon, to the lunar surface, and back. Although this might appear to be the most logical solution, it presented several logistical issues. I guess looking at it simply, that appears to be the most logical issue, but also that spacecraft that goes to the moon is going to be big, and there's no need to land something that big on the moon. I think I like Star Trek when they'll send, the shuttle down. It's not like every time they're just, in fact, Enterprise can't land on a planet. But they're not sending the entire spaceship down to the planet's surface. They're using shuttles or transporters. Because transporters aren't real, we have shuttles. Firstly, one singular module would result in the use of much more fuel, and landing the entire craft on the lunar surface and taking off again would be much more difficult. However, the main reason that this idea was left by the wayside was that the designers and project managers informed NASA that such a vehicle could not be completed until at least 1970. Given that the promise had been that America would land a man on the surface of the moon by the end of the decade, this would not be acceptable. Ah, yes, back when governments used to take deadlines seriously. The second proposal, Earth Orbit Rendezvous, would involve launching the astronaut capsule and propulsion unit that would carry them to the moon separately and having them link up in Earth's orbit before continuing the journey. This idea was ultimately dismissed because it necessitated two separate launchers, essentially doubling the risks involved. This left only one option, and it was the option that NASA eventually went with. The Saturn V rocket would place a 50-ton, 3-modular spacecraft on a lunar trajectory. From there, it would proceed to the moon, enter orbit, and then the lunar module would detach and begin its descent to the surface. Half of this module would be left on the surface, the other half, dubbed the ascent module, would return the lunar explorers to the command module before itself being left behind in lunar orbit. Once the command module returned to Earth, a service module, which contained the fuel and various other essential components for the journey, would be released to burn up in Earth's atmosphere before the command module returned safely to the surface. You can see why people in the 60s were like, oh my god, we're going to conquer the universe, because they were doing it. It's insane today that this is possible. The moon is really far away. Like when you think of the moon in those pictures and textbooks or whatever, you've got like the moon, right here, and then you got like the Earth and the moon super close by, like over here and quite big. But anyways, in reality, the moon is like miles away. It's far away. To get there is insanity. It was insanity in the 60s. It's an insanity today. And they did this in the 60s. The 60s. Although this idea appeared to be the most complicated, it meant that on the return journey, the craft would require far less fuel. Of course, once this course of action had been decided upon, extensive testing began. Although the Apollo program would suffer several setbacks, most notably in 1967 when 3 astronauts were killed by a fire that broke out during a training simulation, which resulted in the deaths of astronauts Virgil Grissom, Edward Wright, and Roger Chaffee. By 1968, they appeared to be on track to deliver on time when the Apollo 8 craft became the first manned vehicle to orbit the moon. In contrast, the Russian lunar program was proceeding much more tentatively. This was partly due to a lot of internal political debate as to whether or not reaching the moon was actually necessary, and partly due to the unexpected death of Sergei Korolev, the chief engineer of the Soviet space program. You don't have to look too hard online to find half-baked theories that suggest his death was a top-secret assassination by the American government. As you may not be too surprised to hear, there is absolutely no evidence to support this, and that's why we call it half-baked. But, by July 1969, everything was ready. The world watched in awe as, apart from a few minor technical difficulties, NASA's incredibly ambitious plan unfolded without a hitch. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the surface of the moon before returning safely to Earth. The Americans had won the long-fought space race over their Soviet opponents, proving, for now at least, their technological and creative superiority. Or had they? There is, and I saw it first on a TV show. I can't remember what it was called. It's like does alternate histories. It was really good. I think it got canceled. Oh crap! What was it called? There was one episode they had when we go back in time, and it's like something happened with like a speech planned by Kennedy, or I think it was Nixon. If the moon astronauts didn't return home. I cannot remember the show. Oh, I think it's Timeless, something like that. Something back then. But anyways, so he made a speech in case the astronauts didn't come home. And so that quote from the speech is, prior to the president's statement, the president should telephone each of the widows to be after the president's statement. At the point when NASA ends communications with the men, a clergyman should adopt the same procedure as a burial at sea, commending their souls to the deepest of the deep, concluding with the Lord's Prayer. And then the actual speech is, fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, know that there is no hope for their recovery. But they also know that there is hope for mankind in their sacrifice. These two men are laying down their lives in mankind's most noble goal, the search for truth and understanding. They will be mourned by their families and friends. They will be mourned by their nation. They will be mourned by the people of the world. They will be mourned by Mother Earth that dared send two of her sons into the unknown. In their exploration, they stirred the people of the world to feel as one. In their sacrifice, they bind more tightly the brotherhood of man. In ancient days, men looked at the stars and saw their heroes in the constellations. In modern times, we do much the same, but our heroes are epic men of flesh and blood. Others will follow and surely find their way home. Man's search will not be denied, but these men were the first, and they will remain the foremost in our hearts. For every human being who looks up at the moon in the nights to come will know that there is some corner of another world that is forever mankind. I'm sorry, but whoever wrote that for like freaking TV show is a genius. But we move on. Almost as soon as the broadcast ended, there were those out there who questioned its validity, although at the point, non-believers were not that common. Various conspiracy theories have, as they always will, gained traction over the years, and this has resulted in a thriving community of those who did not believe that the moon landing actually happened. Of course, the internet has provided a marvelous opportunity for these people to get together, exchange ideas, and generally multiply. Do any of these conspiracy theories hold water, or, if you will, moon dust? Let us take a wedge to some of them and see if they hold up in the face of evidence and fact. Spoiler alert, they don't. The majority of those out there who believe that the entire thing was a hoax, including, depending on whose statistics you look at, between 6 and 10% of Americans, claim that the entire landing was staged at Area 51 in the Nevada desert in order to ensure that the resulting video looked good enough to fool not only the public, but also the entire Soviet Union, not to mention the rest of the world. NASA is alleged to have employed the services of legendary movie producer Stanley Kubrick. It has even been claimed that on his deathbed, Kubrick admitted that the entire thing had been a hoax and that he was responsible for the production. So why don't we start with that? Look, if that had been his deathbed confession, we'd know. But obviously, it wasn't, was it? In a clip taken from a movie titled Shooting Stanley Kubrick, Produced by T. Patrick Murray, the aging director claims that he, along with NASA, was responsible for orchestrating a tremendous hoax at the expense of pretty much everybody in the world. Although in the clip he does not directly attach this hoax to the moon landing, he does later say that with regards to the moon landing, the conspiracy theorists were right on this occasion. Well, that seems pretty slam dunk, doesn't it? Except there's a twist. While the tinfoil hat brigade seized on this as irrefutable evidence that the entire thing had been staged, those who have taken the time to examine the evidence slightly more closely have a few things to say on the matter. Firstly, almost everybody who knew the director and has seen the clip claims that the man is not Stanley Kubrick at all, a claim which gains substantially more weight as we get further into it. Well, relatives of Kubrick have also outright stated it is not him in the video and that nothing contained within that clip is factually correct. So simply, wasn't Stanley Kubrick, was it? We know what he looks like. His family knows what he looks like. It wasn't him. Although, were this true, Kubrick would have been absolutely perfect for the role of directing such a misleading video. There is one piece of evidence that quite conclusively proves that not only was he never interviewed in such a fashion, but that it would have been impossible for him to be interviewed anyway at all. That is, if you believe any of what Murray says. The website that contained the original confession seems to have been taken down. However, I would not be doing my job properly if I didn't dig around a little, and with a piece of software, I was able to resurrect the necessary information. According to the video's corrector, he had been granted unprecedented access to interview Kubrick in May 1999. I have heard people giving videotaped deathbed confessions, but this one is particularly unusual. If it is, as its creator claims, it took place in May of 1999, because then it would have necessitated the use of some sort of medium, since Stanley Kubrick died in March of that year. Although this pretty conclusively proves that Murray was not averse to telling the occasional lie, it by no means proves that the moon landing was not shot on a soundstage somewhere. So let's keep looking. Another reason that this is often given to suggest the moon landing was staged is that in the photographs that were sent back, there are no stars in the sky. Surely that, given the pictures contain the sky and the sky contains stars, it is inconceivable that no stars are visible in any of the moon landing pictures. This at least is the view of many people who do not understand cameras. As I myself do not particularly understand the inner workings of cameras. Excuse me. So according to director of moonpans.com, he explained the whole situation, saying, quote, "Some of the questions come from crazy moon landing deniers is why are there no stars? But also, many are from genuine people who really want to know the answer. Stars are very dim. The lunar surface is very bright. All the photos captured on the lunar surface were taken with the astronauts' chest-mounted cameras at a shutter speed of 1/150th of a second. This is because the bright sunlight was hitting the lunar surface with no filtration by an atmosphere, reflecting off the light-colored terrain, Apollo hardware, and astronaut suits. Stars, on the other hand, are extremely dim and would require a shutter speed of anywhere between 10 and 30 seconds. So a mere 1/150th of a second means no stars would be captured. Although this is often cited as a problem related to cameras of the time, in reality, astronauts visiting the moon would largely suffer the same problem today. When the next batch of astronauts visit, I'm sure this tired old argument will be dragged out again. Just thinking about it, if you take a photo, let's say you're out, it's a very starry night, and you take a photo of someone standing there with the new iPhone Mega XL or whatever that somehow manages to take photos in barely any light at all and make them look great. And if you got a person in the foreground, they're going to look bright. They're going to be there. The background is just going to be dark because that's how photography works. And now we got to discuss the flag. Given that the moon doesn't have any atmosphere, you'd be unlikely to find any noticeable breeze out there, would you? Well, so say conspiracy theories. Do you explain the fact in the video of Neil Armstrong planting the flag, it's waving as if blown by the wind? There is wind in the Nevada desert. There is winds in the Hollywood Hills. This must mean that the moon landing was filmed in one of those locations. This particular argument is exceptionally easy to discount. According to NASA, the flag was waving simply because Armstrong was rotating the pole back and forth in order to secure it in the lunar surface. Now, what people are going to say is, of course NASA would say that. Isn't that convenient? Fortunately, we don't have to take NASA's word on this one. Stupid, lying NASA. The 2 astronauts that first visited the moon, along with 10 others that would follow in their dusty footsteps, collected hundreds of samples of lunar soil and rocks. Many of these samples have been verified by non-NASA experts who have, assuming that it is not completely obvious, confirmed that the rocky surface of an untouched celestial body would not be the easiest place to install a pointy stick, and that it would have been necessary to put a little bit of effort in order to have the flag stand on its own. Had the moon been made of something more malleable, such as cheese, for example, this would not have been necessary and the flag would not have moved. Interestingly, out of the 6 American flags planted on the surface of the moon, only 3 are believed to still be standing. What if the others were blown over? No, they weren't. There's no wind. They just fall over, probably because they weren't put in very well and just degradation over time. I think there's also the belief that they're all just going to be white now because they've just been constantly blasted by sunlight for 50-something years. Just doing my math. I know that I briefly touched on the rocks brought back from the moon, but it's certainly worth looking at them in more detail. They, in their independent verification, provide serious evidence in favor of the original lunar story being true. According to Encyclopedia Britannica and many other sources, the 382 kilograms of lunar rocks were brought back to Earth by the 12 astronauts that walked on the surface. NASA says on their website, quote, between 1969 and 1972, 6 Apollo missions brought back 382 kilograms, 842 pounds, of lunar rocks, core samples, pebbles, sand, and dust from the lunar surface. The 6 space flights returned 2,200 samples from 6 different exploration sites on the moon. In addition, 3 automated Soviet spacecraft returned important samples totaling 300 grams, approximately 3/4 of a pound, from 3 other lunar sites. Now, if you believe NASA, that's all well and good. Those who are inclined to think that these samples were falsified in some way might be interested in this next bit. At the Lunar Sample Building in Johnson Space Center, nearly 400 samples of lunar rocks and soil are sent out to independent laboratories and educational establishments every year. Although you could put forward a compelling argument that institutions such as MIT could possibly be bribed by NASA to provide the verification that they required, even the most hardened conspiracy theorists would have a hard time believing that the Soviet Union, and more recently Russian scientists, would go along with them. And also, even if it was all American ones, it's like the amount of bribery and or whatever would be going on would eventually come out. Because there has to be some 400 a year, that's an awful lot. Someone's going to start singing like a canary. It has been postulated by some that NASA actually obtained these samples with the use of lunar rovers and some other semi-autonomous equipment. But due to the huge amount of samples in their possession, this doesn't stand up at all. Excuse me. It took 3 automated Soviet missions to return 300 grams of samples to Earth. The constant stream of automated collectors that would have been necessary to obtain 382 kilograms would have been so prohibitively expensive that had the moon landing been a hoax, it would have been cheaper to actually just go there. The next theory that we'll look at was put forward by German-American writer Bill Kaysing in a self-published book titled We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 Billion Swindle. Kaysing claimed to be an expert in the field, but the only experience that he had in such matters was working briefly as a technical writer for Rocketdyne, the company that built the Saturn V rocket. During his time of employment, he claims to have gained access to top-secret NASA documents outlining the probability of a successful lunar mission. According to the alleged document, the probability was almost 0. Why would a random technical writer and a subcontractor of NASA get access to this stuff? It's just silly, so obvious, and something that would obviously be very top secret. So what did this all-knowing expert write in his book? Among other things, the book claims that traveling to the moon was completely impossible because in order to do so, astronauts would have to travel through the Van Allen belt. So what exactly are these belts? Discovered by a group of American scientists working under the supervision of Dr. James Van Allen, these belts are made of charged radioactive particles, mostly the product of solar winds. The radiation they cause can be problematic to satellites that spend a lot of time moving through them, and so they require adequate shielding. But how dangerous are they to a group of astronauts passing through them in a spaceship? Well, according to many people who cite them as definitive proof that mankind never went to the moon, anybody passing through them would either be cooked, as in a microwave oven, or would die from radiation sickness shortly afterward. So, is this actually true? Well, kind of. A spacewalking astronaut who, for whatever reason, elected to spend a long time outside in one of the most radioactive areas within these belts would almost certainly suffer some serious effects. However, given that NASA was already aware of these dangers, they calculated a trajectory that would take them through the belts as quickly as possible, while attempting to remain in areas of lower radiation. According to astrophysicists, the radiation they experienced during their journey was actually less than what somebody would get working close to a nuclear reactor. So certainly not enough to cook someone from inside out in a matter of minutes. Whether or not any of the astronauts who passed through the belt suffered any long-term effects, though, is difficult to say. When asked if any of the astronauts had suffered long-term radiation effects, Piers Giggins, a European Space Agency engineer, said this, quote, "That's hard to say because there is a lot of personal data that is protected. Some astronauts have reported seeing radiation, some kind of snow or flashes of light that they can't even see when their eyes are closed. The effect is well reported. The more long-term effects are harder to quantify." Yeah, it's hard to tell, but they have these radiation detectors. They know how much radiation they're exposed to. And it's not these extremely dangerous levels like to cook someone like in an oven. And it's just this. I hate it when it's like with these conspiracy theorists, and it's just like, well, this guy just wants to sell a book, doesn't he? He just wants to get people to buy his book, and I'm sure it worked. I'm sure he made a lot of money off of it, because money is a big motivator. In my opinion, that's what he's up to. While traveling through the belt certainly isn't going to provide you with any health benefits, it would by no means prevent astronauts from traveling to and from the moon. Apart from various flags, the various manned missions to the moon left behind a not inconsiderable amount of equipment. The first mission alone left behind part of the lunar landing module, the lunar rover, as well as lunar ranging reflectors. Those reflectors allowed anybody in possession of a powerful enough laser to accurately measure the distance between the moon and the Earth at any given time. And additionally, while there exists no telescope powerful enough to view the other equipment on the moon, images from both NASA and the European Space Agency have confirmed their existence. I feel like Japan also sent up a craft that saw it. It's not just these guys. We know it's up there. The stuff's up there. In order to prevent this video from becoming a monologue of me roasting all the people who are wrong about stuff, let's take a slightly different angle and have a look at what some people have claimed that astronauts, spaceship, and NASA were actually doing when they were supposed to be landing on the moon. Given that thousands of people have actually watched the Apollo 11 launch with their own eyes, very few theorists have gone as far as to claim that this part of the mission did not actually happen. However, there have been a few interesting theories as to what had happened when the craft passed out of sight. One of the most frequently recurring versions of events states that once Apollo 11 made orbit, it simply stayed there, circling this planet until the staged video footage had been played. Then it returned the astronauts to the ground at the appropriate time. People who believe and more troublingly spread this story seem to forget that it was not only NASA monitoring the progress of the mission. If Apollo 11 simply stayed in orbit, it would have been immediately detected by, among other people, the Soviets, who were very interested. If NASA was faking it, then they still had a crack at it, didn't they? Nevertheless, let's take this and run with it for a moment. Were NASA the only people able to receive the broadcast from Apollo 11? Certainly it would have been possible to use pre-recorded audio conversations and simply combine them with the television broadcast. However, there is at least one verifiable story of an amateur radio enthusiast who was skeptical about NASA's claims regarding the moon landing and interested to see whether or not any broadcast might come from the moon. And if they did, whether or not everything sent back would be broadcast. This man constructed his own antenna system and was able to receive a large amount of the ensuing radio traffic. Larry Basinger was able to get approximately 35 minutes of VHF transmissions between NASA and the Apollo 11 astronauts. People who discount Basinger's claims often state that if the radio signals were being broadcast by an orbiting Apollo 11, then the fact that he could receive them on his homemade equipment does not in any way prove that they were coming from the moon. There are, broadly speaking, two types of antenna. The first, omnidirectional antenna, can receive signals from any direction and does not require much in the way of calibration, besides tuning it to the correct wavelengths or increments thereof. The second type of antenna, which is the type used to detect the transmissions from the moon, is usually simply referred to as a directional antenna. Although often more sensitive, these antennas need to be much more accurately calibrated in order to receive a signal. They need to be pointed more or less exactly at the source of that signal. This was especially the case with Basinger's antenna. Given that the point of this exercise had been to catch NASA out or detect secret messages, Basinger was particularly disappointed to report that absolutely everything was transmitted to the public on TV. Whilst things like this only prove that the Apollo 11 craft actually went to the moon, it does not prove that the broadcasts were not recorded in advance and simply played over the radio from an unmanned craft. Yeah, but you're going so deep now. It's like someone comes up with a debunking thing, and then someone comes up with a yeah, but, and then it's a whole spiral of yeah, buts. Indeed, several people have argued against this evidence by saying exactly that. However, when you start to add the evidence together, the likelihood of a hoax begins to decrease greatly. Although every argument against the moon landing that we've discussed so far can simply be discounted by applying technical or scientific evidence, there are out there on the internet versions of events which are so outlandish and ridiculous that you don't even need any technical expertise to legitimately write them off. Take, for example, the claims of one alleged former employee of a Vegas casino. This story has been removed from the site on which it was originally posted for reasons that will shortly become clear to almost everybody, but I was able to locate a copy. According to this individual, it was absolutely impossible for the 3 astronauts on Apollo 11 to have landed on the moon, simply because at the time they were supposed to be in space. They were drinking and partying in his unnamed casino. Of course they were, because if NASA is pretending to send people to the moon, they're just like, hey, just go to Vegas for the weekend. No worries, no one will see you. No one will say anything. Okay, easy, just have a good time. He goes on to say that after immediately recognizing them, he took several photos to use as evidence. Unfortunately, you're never going to believe this, upon leaving work that night, he was approached by a group of official-looking individuals who confiscated his camera and threatened him with swift and dire retribution should he ever mention the incident to anybody. Now, as I said, this story does not really even require debunking, but let's quickly do it anyways. Even if it turns out that the Apollo 11 mission was completely unmanned and made the journey to the moon and back simply to accurately transmit radio conversations and a pre-recorded video, there is absolutely no way at all that NASA would spend millions of dollars orchestrating what would probably be the most elaborate hoax in human history, only to allow the 3 individuals who were supposed to be on board to be seen in public. I imagine that if they were not on board Apollo 11, they would have been kept in some sort of communication-proof bunker for the duration of the mission. If anybody seriously believes this story, then I will be happy to argue with them in the comment section. Of course, apart from those who deny that mankind has ever landed on the moon, there are those who are perfectly happy to accept that we did, but claim that NASA is hiding things from us. For example, the author of Extraterrestrial Archaeology, that sounds real, by David Hatcher Childress, a man whose name has become synonymous with allegedly, claims that the moon is long inhabited and that Mercury, Venus, Mars, and some of the moons of the outer planets show current or past signs of inhabitation. They don't. Stop trying to sell books. Being particularly reluctant to give any money to this charlatan, I did not actually purchase and read the book. Fortunately, this was not necessary. A quick search on YouTube provided me with a 53-minute video of him talking about the book and presenting his evidence as to exactly how we can prove the moon is inhabited. According to this video, available photographs clearly show huge vehicles moving around on the lunar surface and leaving tracks behind them. Apparently, these vehicles, which resemble large rocks, are evidence of alien mining machines. No, what they're evidence of right now in these photos, they're evidence of large rocks because that's what they are. Childress goes on to suggest that although NASA has carried out extensive studies on these rolling rocks, even they aren't able to explain them. Finding this to be unlikely, I looked into it for approximately 1 minute and discovered that, in fact, this is not true. The so-called rolling rocks can be explained fairly easily. The moon, contrary to popular belief, is not an entirely dead sphere of rock orbiting the Earth. The lunar surface is subject to moonquakes, and as a result of this, boulders on its surface do move around, resulting in marks being left behind, which, according to Childress, are clear evidence of tracked vehicles traveling across the moon. I'll leave it up to you guys to decide which version of events is most likely, but we know. Short of taking every single conspiracy theorist to the moon and showing them physical evidence, which probably still wouldn't be good enough for some of them, there is no 100% definitive way of proving that the official version of events is true. There will always be a few skeptics who hope that one day some leaked government documents will show the whole thing to have been a hoax. But does it really matter? I mean, it's so what if there are a few crazies out there who choose to disregard any evidence they might be shown? I mean, it's not hurting anybody, right? I mean, I guess it's like the vaccine thing. It's like, well, that's hurting people. That is obviously a damaging, dangerous conspiracy theory, which Daniel David Wakefield, what the guy's name was, the doctor who got struck off, so he can't be a doctor anymore because he falsified the data or whatever, and came up and just spearheaded this anti-vaccine movement that's incredibly dangerous. And he's caused, or allegedly indirectly, led to many deaths, so great job on him. No conspiracy, who gives up? Well, interestingly, maybe we should care. According to a study in 2018, carried out by Cambridge University, the largest ever cross-national study on conspiracy theories, people who believe that the moon landing was a hoax are much more likely to believe in far more dangerous right-wing rhetoric. A synopsis of the study claimed that, quote, believers were found to be associated with a wide range of conspiratorial beliefs, with researchers uncovering that these groups are more likely to believe climate change is a hoax, vaccines are harmful, and that Illuminati-style groups rule the world. They also found that 33% of British and French people believe that their governments are obscuring the truth about immigration. And many also support the theory that known as the Great Replacement, which posits that Muslim immigration is part of a plan to make Muslims the global majority. Like, I believe the government's hiding stuff from us. Of course the government's hiding stuff from us. They even say, we're hiding stuff from you. It's called top secret or classified or black budget. Are they hiding this ridiculous stuff? Probably not. I mean, I might think that this is obvious that people who believe one thing are more inclined to believe other stupid things. The way the moon landing hoax is usually presented to the younger generation as definitive proof that the government is always lying to you, coupled with the fact that we cannot, as of yet, 100% prove that we did land on the moon, means that it provides an excellent starting point for introducing world-altering lies, such as the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination causes autism. And therein lies the biggest problem. We as a species can no longer afford the luxury of assuming that common sense will eventually prevail. To quote the X-Files, the truth is out there. Sadly, given people's increasingly propensity to believe whatever is written on Reddit by a random stranger, we really do have a genuine risk of that truth forever being buried forever. Before I finish today, I'd like to quickly reiterate what I believe to be the strongest piece of evidence in favor of the argument that we did, in fact, put a man on the moon. The Soviets were watching everything. If there was even the slightest possibility that they could have exposed the US as a group of lying space race cheaters, then, to my mind at least, they would have seized the opportunity and never, ever let go. And that's where we end today's video. I thought it would be a long one because it's, the moon landing conspiracy is a big one. But it's stupid, it's only a short one. Thanks for being here, everybody. If you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/LarryMLease or use the link in the description. And of course, this episode is brought to you by Fastest VPN. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll see you next time.